Welcome back to Q Dads. Yes, it's me, Ben, and the final episode of Severance has blown all of our minds with some absolutely fantastic scenes and an unexpected ending. Now, not only did we get Mark accidentally killing Mr. Drummond, a great corridor fight scene between the two, but also we saw that Mark abandoned Gemma in the end, which actually was a really unexpected twist. And genuinely, I just didn't think he would have done it. And yes, as we thought, there's no third Mark. I know, I'm disappointed too. And actually, the more I think about it, the more that I feel that the ending wasn't good. Now, don't get shouting at me because actually the episode was fantastic and there was brilliant scenes all the way through. But that actual ending where Gemma and Mark, I think could have played out very differently. And I'm going to talk about this overall towards the end. So let's waste no time crying over spilt milk and let's dive straight in with all the new information that we got from this episode, and of course how that sets up season 3 with our predictions. And yes, don't forget to hit that subscribe button as it really does help us to grow. And like Mark, we're trying to get to 100% completion on our goal too, which is hitting 3,000 subs. So please do help us out. Now, we start the episode off with Miss Cobell, Devon and Mark all in the cabins discussing the overall plan of what they need to do to rescue Gemma. This then leads to a conversation between Mark and his inner self as they continue to talk to each other through a video camera, which then ends up going from a plea for help to an argument and the lack of trust between the two, which I just thought was fascinating. And the fact that they were both having a conversation with each other and almost had opposing thoughts and opinions was just genius. But of course, things begin to escalate and Miss Cobell steps back in to inform us that yes, the numbers that Mark has been working towards are essentially fragments of Gemma's mind, and that Cold Harbour, once complete, is the end of her life and also the end of Mark S. Now, when this conversation was going on, we did cut back to James Egan with Helly, who basically said that he sees Kia Egan within Helly and doesn't essentially love his own daughter. But what he also mentioned was that tomorrow was going to be a special day. Now obviously we see him later on the episode watching Gemma in the Cold Harbour room, so I'm going to touch on that in just a moment, but it was weird that what his involvement actually is within this whole process. But as I said, we'll come back to that in just one moment. Now, the opening with Mark and Mark was just brilliant. I think it clearly starts to sum up the whole of season 2. The Innie's becoming more than just a thing, for lack of a better word. Innie Mark knows that if he saves Gemma, it's actually lights out for him. And based on all the interactions with the non-severed people, his trust is clearly broken. For me, this stems back to when Bert said about the Innies and the Outies having their own soul. And I think this season has played a lot into this as well. Even the point of reintegration now has become almost as scary, with the outie Mark explaining that he had 2 years of heartbreak. So how does reintegration really work? It's clear that we would have 2 different personalities merging. Ultimately, this new person is neither Mark or Mark S. So let us know your thoughts, because can we technically still get our third Mark? And just before we move on, it was finally nice to see someone confirm our initial theory that the numbers were in fact Gemma's mind or memories being rebuilt. Ste had this theory straight from episode 1. And now, what are they planning on doing with this? That is the question all over again. And we'll try and answer that towards the end. Mark S threatens to not help unless he's back on the 7th floor. So we end up back on the 7th floor, and strangely enough, opening to a new painting, The Exalted Victory of Cold Harbour, which shows Mark getting 100% completion on Cold Harbour, but surrounded by all the people that have been kind of key players within his life. We see his co-workers that he's known for the past couple of years, but also the people on the outside too, like Rickon and Devon, and we even get the 4 Tempers floating around. Now, this is a very unusual painting, but it highlights all that commitment into celebrating the success of Mark S. He then makes his way back to his desk, and we get to see an animatronic replica of Kia Egan holding a letter from Mr. Milchick, which basically says, "Well done, and informs him that this moment is going to go down in history and make him one of the most important people in history too. We then see the return of Dylan as a letter from his outie, which is a response to his resignation from the previous episode. And it basically says that although he hates his innie, actually he respects him for being something that he could not, and hopes that he continues working, which I actually found quite touching. And I'm glad, because now they've almost got that shared connection, a belief in each other, something that obviously Mark and his outie don't have. Which again makes me ask the question about reintegration. Would a reintegrated Dylan become more confident and a better person overall? And yes, we then get Mark, who completes Cold Harbour finally. The thing that we've been waiting for 2 whole seasons is finally done. And as a way of celebrating that, Kia Egan comes to life in a weird pre-planned speech with Milchick, which then goes a little bit south towards the end and makes me actually think who is controlling the voice of this animatronic. Or is it some kind of AI based on the words of Kia? As it almost looked like it paused for a while, waiting for the AI model to kind of process the data. And yes, we then get some musical introduction and we get to see the return of Dancing Milchick, which we loved from season 1. And this also introduces a new department, C&N, which is choreography and merriment. And at this point is where I was watching, where I literally wrote down in my notes, he has a whole fucking band. Now, the introduction of this was mind-boggling, and I'm very surprised that Mark actually remembered to go and fetch Gemma, because I was just mesmerised by the whole scene. And you've got to commemorate Lumen here, because as much as they're doing some shady work, actually they know how to put on a show. But what is the purpose of this C&M department? Are they just brought to life when a celebration is in order? Or are they just all kind of sitting around on a daily basis, practicing different routines? It's just a really unusual department. And even Helly mentioned that they've seen people disappear, insinuating that they don't just appear periodically. But of course, this is Severance, so things begin to escalate as normal, and Milchick is led into the bathroom by Helly, and then locked in there with the help of Dylan and a vending machine. All whilst Mark is making his way through the corridors to the export room. But out of nowhere, we get Mr. Drummond, who comes from the export room, but then enters into a room through a wall. Yes, some secret room embedded within the corridors of the 7th floor, which makes me question that there's probably a lot more of those rooms too. But in this room, he invites Lorne, accompanied by a goat, and they're about to make some sacrificial message in a ceremonial way. And I'm not sure why, unless it's just to do with the tradition thing and how that wraps into the cult of Lumen. But yeah, this was very unusual. But at least we finally know why the goats were there. But here is the big question from this. The goat is used to essentially ferry the person to Kia's afterlife. So, implying that they kill a goat for every human they kill, there were a lot of goats. So how many people had they planned to kill, and why? It does feel very strange, and we can only assume that there had been other gemmers that this has happened to before. Maybe not the same severed part, but at least a concept of kidnapping people. But we move on to what I think is one of the greatest parts of the show, which is where Marquez is banging on the door to try and get into the export room, and Mr. Drummond comes out, and we get this great fight scene between the two of them. And Mr. Drummond literally punches Mark straight in the face out of nowhere, and then at one point he throws his body up against the whole wall. But of course, in the final moments, just as we think Mark's about to die, he is saved by Lorne, who puts a gun to his head. And again, after a quick, brilliant fight scene with those two, Mark eventually moves through to the lift. But I've got to point out here that the interaction with all three of them was great. Good performance and perfect choreography. So Mark leads Drummond into the export room and explains to him in the lift what is going to happen. But of course, we then switch to Mark's outie, and that automatically causes him to pull the trigger and kill Mr. Drummond, which was absolutely crazy, and I did not expect that at all. But he continues and makes his way through the corridors as we see them reunited, and that is Mark and Gemma. But at this point, Gemma is in the cold, hard room and has no feelings, no emotions, no memories, and essentially is just an empty vessel at the end of the line. And in this moment, it actually does make me think about Jane Egan's purpose in all of this. Is the fertility clinic merely just some way of finding women who have experienced deep trauma? As clearly using the cot would have brought back memories to a normal person. I wonder if this trauma snaps the innies out of it, and this would then explain, like we've said previously, why they had Gemma on the severed floor. That was clearly the early testing to see how she would react to Mark, which clearly she had failed, hence being locked away again. And getting back to Jane Egan for a second, is this some weird way of finding another woman for his seed? But one who goes through this process and to almost neutralise all of their memories and feelings, is that something that's happening? Or are we just kind of overthinking it? Of course, Mark persuades Gemma to exit the room and immediately returns to the original persona, and they share a quick moment as they escape the floor and get into a lift and end up kissing, which of course leads them to awkwardly look at each other as they change state once more. Mark then leads Miss Casey through the corridors and ends up pushing her out of one of the exits, causing her to revert back to Gemma. And then, in a shocking twist, he does not go with her. I mean, yes, we expected a bit of hesitancy, or maybe a quick goodbye to Helly, but he doesn't. He just completely ignores Gemma and actually runs along the corridors with Helly. And now, this actually leads me onto my overall thoughts. Now, for me personally, and Steve does disagree, I just don't think that this was a great ending. Now, the episode was fantastic and the series was great overall. I'm not knocking any of that. And yes, the scene between Mark and Drummond was just pure brilliance. But when he was heading to the export room and we get to see that introduction of Mark and Gemma, maybe it could have been done slightly different. The fact that he left Gemma outside to run off with Helly, knowing that he's pretty much tethered to the severed floor with nowhere to run or nowhere to go, is just really idiotic. For me personally, I'd rather it have ended at the point of the lift, or maybe where Gemma and Mark meet and we kind of just end it there, potentially not knowing each other or mirroring season 1, as we've said before, with those words, "she's alive," being uttered again. And no, this is not me being bitter about not having a third Mark, although I have mentioned it a few times now. But it was a great ending. It was just fell short a little bit for me, I think. The more I think about it, the more it plays on my mind that maybe, like you say, when they awkwardly looked at each other in the lift, it could have ended there. Where Steve, he has a different take on this. And he thinks that Helly might push Mark through the door as some kind of weird final act. But seeing them run off together actually ties into the series really well. As he's already mentioned, this season is about the concept that really innies are real humans too. They're not just some random part of your brain, but since the conception that they're alive too. Again, this stems into the age-old topic of when human life starts. We're not going to get into that though, it's clearly just a similar concept. Now the interesting take here is that final shot looked like it faded into the painting. Now, does that mean that actually in season 3 we have a time skip? And will we see this painting created? Maybe for some reason the severed floor is left alone with people living there. I know it sounds crazy, but you can't exactly storm out of the place and take them by force, as you would ultimately be hurting the bodies of the outies. So I wonder if that time skip will put Helly and Mark as the head of this weird civilization on the severed floor. And yes, again, it's crazy, but it's clear that Jane is very interested in Helly. Enough to leave them alone to see what happens? Maybe. Now, following this, we still don't actually know what we're going to do with Gemma's chip once they extract it. as apparently the showrunners have said that no clones and stuff at all. So, what would be the purpose of making this perfect severed person if not to use it as some form of AI? Now, am I closer with a thing? Or does it stem on one of my theories from a few episodes ago where we have that crazy idea about using her as a persona in like assistant devices? I mean, the showrunners did write this show after watching Black Mirror, so that's not too far-fetched. They might have a similar story. Gemma or Kia Regan is the AI of the future. Let me know your thoughts. But of course, one final thing that I do want to touch on is Miss Cobell seemed really shocked to learn of Irv's outie and his knowledge about the door, which makes us ask the question, where is Irv? Now, I assumed that we would see the train this episode, but clearly not. So why did Irv see this door before? Is it as we expected and Irv's outie had experienced something similar to what Gemma did and was left to live? Now, in some mad theory, he could be the AI created from Bert or someone else, as we did one time see Project Montauk. Now, I don't know, but it's just very strange, and we're going to be waiting, obviously, another couple of years to find out what happened with Irv, who that person he's talking to on the phone is, and of course, the rest of the guys with Helly, Mark, and Dylan, and of course, Mr. Milchick. Will he ever survive that thrashing from the band? Now, thanks for joining us on this series. It's been an absolute blast. But don't forget, please hit that subscribe button, as it really does help us to grow. And of course, we will be covering the new season of Black Mirror when it drops on the 11th of April. You're not going to want to miss out on that. So as always, not about us, it's about you. Let us know in the comments your thoughts on this whole season and especially this final episode. And once again, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time with something new.